They were obviously investigating Russia's attempt to influence the 2016 election, and they asked me to come forward to give, to the best of my knowledge, what I knew about that, and I was happy to cooperate with the committee in their investigation of Russian interference with the democratic process in the United States. Chairman asked me to respect the fact that that the specific questions and answers would stay in the room and not come out here to the cameras.
That was former Clinton campaign chairman John Podesta, whose hacked personal emails were a focal point of the election. He spoke with the House Intelligence Committee yesterday. Joining us from Washington, ranking member of that committee, Democratic Congressman Adam Schiff of California. We want to ask you more about that, but I'm curious what your take is on the White House calling the whole thing the Russia hoax.
Well, of course, this is a continuation of the president's strategy to try to demean, downplay the investigation. And, you know, the irony this week, which is so inescapable, is the president is criticizing his predecessor for not doing more to speak out on Russia at the very time the current president, is refusing to speak out on Russia. The most important thing the president of the United States could do today to protect us in the future is to acknowledge what Russia did, to help the country prepare for when they may do this again, to develop a national consensus that no matter who it helps or who it hurts, both parties will reject any foreign interference. That is the single most important way to inoculate the country against foreign interference. And the president is not doing it, instead is still blaming his predecessor.
Willie. So let me ask you about a tweet you sent out, Congressman, where you addressing President Trump, you said, "No, Mr. President, President Obama did not want to be perceived as helping Clinton. That was his mistake. Everything since has been yours." What do you think was the core mistake of the Obama administration? We're talking about that Washington Post piece of last week where one former administration official was saying, quote, "We kind of choked in regards to our response to Russia's interference." What should the Obama administration have done that it did not do?
Well, I think what they should have done, and you know, Senator Feinstein and I were making this case in real time, so this isn't simply our Monday morning quarterbacking. We were urging the president to come out and make attribution early, to declassify as much as he could about the Russian intervention, and to pursue sanctions then, not wait until after the election. As it turned out, Senator Feinstein and I had to do our own attribution because we couldn't successfully persuade the administration to do it. When they did the following month in October, the month before the election, it really wasn't enough, I think, to impress upon the public the seriousness of what Russia was doing. And I think they did that for perhaps understandable reasons. They didn't want to be perceived as influencing the outcome of the election. They didn't want to play into a narrative that there was an effort to rig the election.
But Congressman, shouldn't the security of our election system and of our democracy, frankly, of a foreign government intervening, should have superseded any perception problems or narrative problems they were worried about?
Absolutely, absolutely, and indeed this was precisely the case that Senator Feinstein and I were making. Now, we didn't make that successfully. They did make attribution, but only in a written statement by two administration officials, the head of the Office of National Intelligence as well as the Secretary of DHS. But you're absolutely right. I think that the American public's need to know outweighed those other considerations, all of which could have been managed. But the most important thing was not to wait until after the election to tell the American people what a foreign power was trying to do, and as well to take steps to deter further interference during the campaign, because one of the other concerns that I had was that in the absence of a more forceful response, in the absence of attribution, they were really giving a green light to continued Russian intervention.
Casey Hunt has a question. Casey?
Congressman, you heard from John Podesta yesterday. Some of your colleagues on the Democratic side suggested that was a Republican push. I'm wondering if you agree with that. Did you learn anything valuable from Mr. Podesta? And what do you hope to learn from Roger Stone when he goes before your committee later on in July?
You know, I think it was valuable to bring John Podesta in. You know, part of our mission is not only to determine what the Russians did and whether the Russians had the help of any U.S. persons, but also what was the U.S. government response? How did they respond? How did the U.S. government, the FBI, the Department of Homeland Security respond when we learned the Russians were in our computers? How did they respond when John Podesta learned that his emails had been hacked? This was obviously went to the core of our democratic process, and we need to learn because, as James Comey said, the Russians will be back, or more accurately, in my view, the Russians have never left. So I think his testimony was helpful, was important. We should not be afraid to find out the answers to any of these questions, and this is, I think, a core area of our interest. In terms of Mr. Stone, obviously there's been a lot said in the public sphere. I don't want to get into too much detail about it. Yeah. But you know, he has said at various times that he was in contact with Julian Assange, that he had direct Twitter communications with Guccifer II, this known cutout for Russian intelligence. And of course, he made those statements that John Podesta's time in the barrel was coming. And then, of course, John Podesta's emails were hacked and published. So I think there's a lot that's in the public domain that will be a subject of interest. But I don't want to get into too many of the particulars.
Got it. Congressman Adam Schiff, thank you very much.
Thank you.
And now,
thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.